Thank you so much, Eugene. That was a truly informative panel. My name is Ipileng Mkari, and I am exceptionally excited to bring you this next part of our masterclass for first-time property buyers, acquiring your property. So knowledge really is power, and if you're a first-time buyer, you're probably young, you are rather inexperienced in this area, probably rather overwhelmed, this really is for you. And on that note, I would like to make sure that I introduce you to our panel. We have quite a panel in front of us, and I'm just going to introduce them if they don't mind. It's just going to be a little bit easier doing that. So we've got, first of all, Carlo Mariani, who is the founder of the Property Coach. We have Candace Schultz from, I believe, Schultz Attorneys. We have Belinda Lewis, who is going to be representing STBB Firm. We also have Sean Rademeyer, I believe, who's from, is it Multinet? Is that correct? And we also have Ezra Rasete, who is the founder of Infinite Property. Now, before we get into the discussion, panelists, I just want to set the scene. You know, we have been talking quite a bit about, the first session was around why buy now? And I think Derek and the team really got into that in an excellent way, just to paint the background for us. We've listened to some panelists talk about personal financing, finding your property, pricing and location, which was just the previous session by Eugene and team. And I really loved one of the panelists who said, in fact, homes today come with a motor plan. I thought that was quite nifty, quite a new way of thinking about your first time buy as a first time property owner. Now, this amazing expert panel that we have is going to obviously take us through what I would like panelists is for us to demystify the acquisition process, because I think that is exactly what first-time buyers need to be able to understand. They need to understand what they're getting into, and some of the very critical things that I think have been touched on are financial preparedness, understanding what laws are in the midst of this process that can actually add to your frustration and the pressure, and also to the expenses. Getting help, you know, there is so much information out there, but I think a lot of first-time buyers probably don't have direct access to that information or don't know where to find it. Loan applications, and maybe Sean, you can talk a little bit about that, and that process, we'll touch on that a bit. And obviously the good old common thing that we all understand around location. I think that has really been spoken about by the various teams. So during the panel, what we'll do is we'll look at your questions as well, and we'll make sure that we can actually answer them. But before we even get there, let me start off with you, Ezra. I think, you know, if you are a young first-time buyer, one of the questions I want to ask you is, you know, why would you advocate that a young individual or a first-time buyer, may not be that young, actually looks at the concept of buying as opposed to renting or being a tenant?
Well, Bileng, thanks a lot for the question. I think that's a good question, and thank you everybody for inviting me here. And I'm actually very excited to be amongst the esteemed panelists as well here today. So why would somebody buy instead of renting? Let's just say today, in today's age, I mean, buying actually is, you know, almost at the same price as renting. Actually, you can actually be able to use this same amount of rent that you're going to be paying a month on a monthly basis, and then be able to use the same to pay your bond and be able to pay for your property. So why would somebody buy? Because there's always all these mechanisms of finance, from rent to buy, from, you know, flips. Plus, the bank is actually giving away some money because of the current interest rates that are happening right now, and also well-priced properties that are coming onto the market, actually. So I think that if you somebody who's looking at opportunities, now's the right time to look into that. As long as you're well-informed when you're doing your buying, and also as long as you're doing your numbers correctly, and as long as you have in the right location, and you're always buying for demand. You must always look for buying for demand. If there's no demand, then you're going to struggle with rentals and getting tenants as well. And one more thing is also just be very cognizant of using data. There's a lot of data that's coming with TPN, rental monitoring. They've been doing that for quite some time now. I think we had them on an online summit last week, and we were discussing the type of tenants that you must be looking out for. maybe having like a C grade tenant or an A grade tenant or B grade tenants. And that's all depending on, obviously their good standing and how they've been paying and all those things. So you must be well informed about that as well when you're buying. So I'll just say that educate yourself. And buying right now is well too affordable. A lot of us millennials actually are struggling with affordability for a while. So affordability has been like a hurdle for a lot of millennials to actually get into the property market. So most of them actually right now are getting into that because of the 100% and 105% bonds that are getting, the current interest rates, and actually the good price properties that are on the market. So I would say that take advantage of now. This is something that's not going to happen anytime soon again. And just be sure that you make well-informed decisions that are based on your numbers as an investor and the good returns that you're going to be getting at the end of the day. So buying, I would say, is the best way to go instead of renting, actually, because it's probably going to be the same amount of money you're spending on your rent as well.
Ezra, I'm so glad you touched on the millennials because, as you can see, I'm certainly not in that bracket. And I think why it's so important for me that we talk about millennials is because I think the power of this entire masterclass, actually for me, is really geared towards that group of individuals who are coming into the space, potentially, highly aspirant individuals who obviously are seeking something as a first-time something. And I think we heard in one of the panel discussions just earlier how, for me in my day, potentially getting a first car was something a little bit more exciting than getting a first house. So I think there's got to be quite a strong shift in terms of our own attitude towards investment, just as a people, as civil society, understanding, the pitfalls, but also the opportunities that exist within the space. And I really, really hope that, in the work that you do, certainly you look like you're more the millennial stage, that you actually are advocating that around the people that you work with. But Sean, just moving on, South Africa has a growing economically active population, but that isn't correlated in terms of jobs growth. And I suppose that has quite an impact on someone who's trying to navigate themselves through this process of acquiring a property. There is a lot of fear, actually, if we just think about the backdrop of what South Africa is, where we come from, and the challenges that a lot of first-time buyers come across. A lot of young people or millennials, or even individuals who've been employed, who today, post-COVID, may actually not be in full employment, may be temporarily employed, actually may not have things like deposits, may not have friends and family to lean on to actually acquire some sort of financial help. So how does one, from the financial perspective, begin to assist someone to navigate through this process of acquiring a property, putting on your hat, Sean, obviously, of a home loan specialist who comes with that level of understanding. And obviously there are a myriad of other tools or solutions like grants that also are available. Maybe you can touch on that aspect for us.
Yeah, I think, the previous panelists have spoken quite intensively about the FLIS subsidies that there is available to consumers, first-time home buyer benefits that the banks give out there. I think for any new customer or new first-time home buyer coming into the market, you need to understand that, the banks look at certain aspects of your income and affordability that you can actually afford a property for. And the biggest mistakes we see is that a lot of our customers put in expenses in their income and expenditures that won't exist when they go into the new property. And unfortunately, whatever you submit to the bank, they're going to take into account and you get declined. And a lot of our customers then, get quite negative about the buying process. So it's very important that if you are getting into the market, that you deal with someone that understands the process, that understands all the things that you should and should not put into an application, and then go through it. And on that note, it's sometimes better to use the experts like an originator in the market that's been there for over 20 years versus going directly to your bank, because you don't fill in the details that is actually required to get you a loan. You actually fill in too much detail. And sometimes that's detrimental to you as a consumer.
Indeed. So I think what you're saying, Sean, also is that, be quite savvy, be financially savvy around how you actually present yourself. Carlo, one of the things that I read about your profile is that you are an individual who's rather passionate about fast tracking people into this concept of success around property. So here we are talking about acquiring property, Carlo. How would you marry those issues? We are in a post-COVID environment. There is a different potential for first-time buyers to actually leverage, low interest rates. The opportunity to come into the market is really alive and well. We're also hearing about the fact that as much as we are in this challenging social environment, the opportunities exist, and therefore the housing market is potentially available for those who are ready to invest. What would your 2 or 3 tips be for an individual who's never ever bought a home, be to, in fact, what are the key steps that you need to understand in acquiring a property?
Thank you, Ipileng. Yeah, I think first of all, like where the rubber hits the tarmac is a document called the offer to purchase. And this document is an exceptionally important document, and it's a document that, generally speaking, ordinary South Africans do not understand, and they are completely overwhelmed by this document. Now, myself, I'm a property investor first and foremost, and I think it's critical, for South Africans to understand that that document there's no such a thing as a standard offer to purchase. The President of South Africa, doesn't gazette a standard template for such an agreement. It's actually an agreement, it's a contract between 2 parties that agree to agree what they want to agree as long as it's legal. So it's very important that, like a first-time buyer or a property investor doesn't simply accept what's written into the agreement. And there has to be a duty of understanding, because it absolutely terrifies me when, I have people coming to me saying, I've had to pay commissions for a deal that never took place, for a property that you never bought. And that is part of the price you pay to what I call property ignorance. So I think that's a very important point. And I don't know if you want to interrupt me, hey, Peleng, or you want me to move forward?
No. I was going to say, Carlo, it's not even interrupt you. One of the elements that has been spoken about extensively today is the role of an agent, an estate agent, and how important that particular role is. To walk you through the processes, and even understanding that an agent themselves has to be a registered individual. A lot of buyers are completely unaware of such aspects. So it would be important, I think, Carlo, for you maybe to unpack some of those real issues that you come across in buyers who are completely unaware, because this is the opportunity for us to take the acquisition process, but to use all the knowledge we've heard in the last 3 sessions and to really consolidate it here.
Yeah, I think, like first and foremost, I would say that, agents first and foremost represents the seller. So, and I think that one must not be fooled by that in terms of making sure that you understand, you protect your rights. And simply because something is being told to you verbally, as long as it's not in the offer to purchase, it's absolutely worth nothing, so that's really important that, verbal agreements are reduced to writing in an offer to purchase. And make sure that if you don't understand an agreement, if you don't understand the clause, rather not sign it, take it home, maybe involve, a property educator, maybe involve a legal representative, because once it's signed, an offer to purchase is a legally binding agreement that can get you into a whole lot of trouble, a lot of expensive trouble if you don't understand it. And, you cannot basically go back and say, well, I didn't understand it, because that's not going to help you. So I think it's empowering yourself with knowledge around the nitty-gritty of those agreements, and maybe Candice, is going to like unpack it. Really, really important that, first-time buyers do that.
Thanks, Carlo. So we know that the overall costs of a new home are not always fully understood or very transparent, Candice. And I think that is such a critical element, just based on what Carlo's just touched on. We've heard most of the morning. I really want to go a little bit deeper into that aspect, because You also are here representing, I believe, your firm, where you guys do quite a bit of conveyancing. And, you know, we know obviously that as a conveyancer, there are a number of levels or a sliding scale at which, you know, specific property sizes or quantums obviously attract, you know, specific costs. Could you please demystify that for our listeners and make sure that we begin to understand what those hidden costs or unknown costs are that you know, first-time buyers really need to be aware of?
Thanks, Ipeling. Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, as you mentioned, your buying your first home could be your biggest investment that you make even in your lifetime. And as such, you should treat it as buying a significant asset and doing a proper due diligence, not only on your side, but on the seller's side as well. So that first aspect of the due diligence is essentially understanding all of the costs involved, which include the transfer costs, which include, you know, on the seller's side, there are your clearance certificates that you have to obtain in terms of getting your rates and taxes paid. I mean, I've recently come across a property, I think it was 1.5 million Rand. It had a rates bill of 700,000 Rand. So before that property can be transferred, that 700,000 Rand has to be paid and put up by the seller in cash. So these are things really that you as a first-time buyer need to fully understand before you make the commitment in terms of making that acquisition, because you could find yourself being locked into a transaction that's never going to take place. You're locked into it, and you may already have given up your occupation in terms of your existing premises. So it's really, really important, you know, don't rely on the fact that the seller is putting up their transferring attorneys. And as Carlo, you know, mentioned, you know, it's the agent and potentially the transferring attorney that are looking out for the seller's interest. What about the buyer? And it's really important that a buyer has those consultations with someone like a Carlo, you know, who is a property coach, but also an attorney, and just, you know, goes and has a 1-hour consult with an attorney and gets all of that information to know that they have, you know, that they know exactly what it is that they're in for. And there are going to be nuances with every single property that need to that need to be brought to the surface and uncovered. So that due diligence process is really important. You know, one of the new things that's come up as well is the SPLUMA Act. It's another requirement now for the seller essentially to have those certificates in place. If you don't have that in place, that could take another 2-3 months to get. And potentially, you know, it's something that the seller can't even get because they haven't got their engineers. It's a spatial planning certificate that needs approval for any new build or existing build as well. And if the seller hasn't conducted themselves appropriately in terms of getting those certificates, you're not going to be able to get the transfer through. You know, so it's become a highly regulated space, and you need to take advice in order to be appropriately prepared.
Thank you, Candice. Candice, I mean, you know, in terms of the sliding scale, I mean, is it important for new-time buyers to be obviously aware of the fact that, you know, conveyancing fees obviously are not necessarily flat rates. They obviously, you know, depend on the size of asset that you're acquiring. Sure. And that obviously has a direct impact on a first-time buyer and the entry level at which they're coming in. Maybe you could just touch on that, because I think that it's so important that in the conversation we're having, you're talking about financial preparedness. You know, I'm so worried about the pre-acquisition costs that are piling up, and this budget that is just kind of growing before you've actually gone to Sean to get the money to buy the asset.
Well, fortunately for properties below R1 million, there's no transfer duty, and essentially the transfer fee, which is, so you have your transfer duty, which is paid to SARS, and then you have your transfer fee, which is paid to the attorney. So that is something that is essentially tariffed as well. So you can look at transfer fees generally starting from around 7,000 Rand up to, you know, as you mentioned, it's a scaled effect. So the larger the property, the more the transfer fee is. It's a regulated fee. However, that does not prevent you from asking your attorney or asking the transferring attorney to give a discount. And that is something that you should deal with in the offer to purchase, before because what generally happens is in the offer to purchase, the transferring attorney is set, it's stipulated, and then they'll set their fee. This is something that you need to negotiate up front. So negotiate the fee up front. The attorneys can go up to 50% in terms of their discounts, which is fairly significant and it can make a huge difference. If you've got a 20,000 Rand transfer fee, it's a big difference if that comes down to 10%. So I think that's really important to know, is that even though it's regulated and it's tariffed, you can, the attorneys can't charge more than that, but they can most definitely discount their fee.
Thank you so much, Candice. I think really, really worthwhile information. And we can't obviously kind of undermine the comment you made around due diligence. It's so critical for first-time buyers just to understand exactly what is involved in this, just like you would buy anything else. As Candice has, quite correctly said, this could be your largest investment. Welcome, Belinda. I would love to just bring you in here. So the one aspect, obviously, of acquiring a property is that from a legal point of view, I mean, we've touched on some of the regulatory aspects, but, acquiring your first asset could be done, I suppose, in different ways. In the personal approach or juristic, kind of approach. Could you maybe just unpack a little bit the pros and cons in your view of the different ways in which a first-time buyer, and maybe the most practical way that a first-time buyer should be really interacting with a sale or an acquisition rather?
No problem. Hello, all viewers or listeners. So obviously one could have, as you say, one could acquire a property in a number of persons, be it a natural person, one person, or a married couple. If you are married in community of property, the property will always go into the joint estate because you are married in community. There is only one estate as such, so it would go into both names. Otherwise, could go into an individual's name who is married out of community of property, either with their spouse or on their own. Okay, that's what we call a natural persons acquiring. And then you get, of course, the juristic person, which is your company, closed corporation, to a lesser extent, trust, and that is your juristic entity. Now, whether one acquires a property in one's own, in the name of a natural person or a juristic person, there is no difference in the transfer costs payable, and that includes the portion that's payable to the receiver of revenue. There was a difference in the past, but there's no such difference anymore. But however, that doesn't mean that it is necessarily an attractive option to put it into a juristic person, where rates used to be higher in the past. There certainly are considerations which are very important, which are the likes of, when you come to dispose of that property out of a juristic entity, it being a capital disposal tax event, capital gains tax comes into the equation. It's a capital gains tax event, and the rates are higher for companies and trusts disposing of immovable property, the capital gains tax events, and I won't go into too much detail there because it's a big discussion, but the rates are lower where a natural person disposes of property. And to add to that, where a natural person disposes of their primary residence, they enjoy up to a 2 million Rand net capital gain, free of capital gains tax. So in respect to their primary residence, registered in their name, they sell and they transfer that property, there's 2 million net capital gain profit that you can make on that transaction before you enter the realm of having to pay capital gains tax to the receiver of revenue, which is quite a large profit to make. It obviously depends on how long you've owned the home, what you've spent, etc. But I must reiterate, that is where a property is registered in the name of a natural person and where it is their primary residence, not for an investment property that you might rent out or a holiday home.
Belinda, you've hit the nail on the head. And before you even continue, I think what we want to capture here is that, you know, most of today, we've spoken really about the elements, the marketing environment, the economy, you know, interest rate opportunities, whether people should be buying or not. And what you've just spoken about is really, really critical if we're thinking about investors who are potentially coming in as first-time buyers, but who see the ownership of property as a potential wealth creation opportunity. And really what you're doing is segregating the first-time buy, which is potentially maybe your main home, and understanding that and how you would typically enter into that transaction simply, and potentially also get, as you correctly said, the appropriate CGT, leverage, or I don't even know what other word to use.
Relief.
And then relief. Thank you, Madam Lawyer. So, you know, then obviously looking at what could happen post that, if, you know, a Carlo or an Ezra were talking to these individuals and saying, use this opportunity now to build up a little bit of a war chest and a balance sheet, a personal balance sheet for yourself. I think really, really important that you've actually highlighted that, because that forms part and parcel of the decisions that people need to make in terms of acquiring properties. Belinda, is there something else that you wanted to say in conclusion there?
No problem. So Eppeling, I think, you know, just to conclude on that particular point, it all depends. I mean, here the forum and the audience is the first-time home buyer. So I would say most often then I think it would be best to consider one's own names to put the property into, because if that is not going to be a property that you don't intend possibly selling in the future and possibly wanting to upgrade that property over a course of time and a number of years, if you're not going to hold it long-term as a very long-term investment, like one would a holiday home or the ultimate home that you have acquired and don't intend to sell, then I would put it into one's own name, because one doesn't want to be penalized unnecessarily by owning it in a juristic person. And then when you come to sell in 7 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, had it been in your own name, you could have enjoyed the primary residence capital gains tax relief, whereas now it is in a company or a trust, or where you certainly won't get that relief, which is quite substantial. But there are other factors. If you're building a portfolio, one also has to think about things like estate duty, growing your estate, exposing your estate potentially to estate duty when you pass away, spreading your assets into different vehicles. It depends also, you know, what you intend to do, rent it out, tax benefits. It's quite a big discussion, actually.
It is. It's a huge discussion, and one which we're not going to have time to have today. But I do want to just pose some questions to you panelists, and I see time is running away with us. So a question here from Seshni Govender. If the seller refuses, I don't know if Candice already responded, if the seller refuses to pay up any outstanding amounts like levies, rates, water, lights, etc., is it the onus of the buyer to settle these, and what would be your advice? Candice, maybe you want to give a thought there, or Belinda?
Should I answer that?
Go ahead.
Okay. So effectively, you've got a seller who you are saying owes an extensive amount of rates on their property, and they're not able to make the payment and or are refusing. Obviously, now one needs to make that payment in advance of transfer to get a rates clearance certificate, because we need to lodge that for transfer purposes. So one's now between a rock and a hard place, and what to do here. It certainly is not the obligation of the buyer to cover that amount. What one can look at is a bridging finance scenario to arrange bridging finance through, there are a number of companies that make the offering and offer the service, where the seller bridges money against guarantees emanating from the process of transfer, which is going to happen, and out of which he's going to get net proceeds. So he bridges the rates in advance. But it all depends on two things. Are the guarantees in order on the sale? In other words, has the purchaser done everything they need to do in terms of signed documents, paid costs, provided guarantees for the full purchase price, and are there sufficient net proceeds once the seller has paid any agent's commission, discharged any money owing on any bond, paid the clearance certificates, and is there sufficient proceeds on your estimate draft final statement of account to the seller to actually then pay back that amount borrowed up front from the bridging finance company together with interest? And I mean, if that is the case, then that is certainly a solution which happens all the time. Just this week I've had one with a big rates bill outstanding where the seller potentially needed to bridge money, but then luckily was able to find it elsewhere, because naturally bridging finance comes with fees, but certainly it is not for the buyer or the buyer's obligation to cover any arrear amounts. I mean, if they offer to, that's another story.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sean, maybe let me bring you in here into this conversation, because I'm sure as lenders or home loan providers, you must come across, as Belinda is suggesting in the question, a number of sellers who are in significant challenges and arrears, but who obviously from your book you would want to obviously recover as much as you can. What are the kind of tools and financing options that, other than just the straight on bridging finance that Belinda's touched on, that you guys provide, and or advice, I suppose, to new home buyers, because we are talking to first-time buyers, and I think it's quite critical. I'm listening to a lot of the questions here really related to the costs, the unforeseen issues, and you never know what an unscrupulous or a challenged seller, you never know the position they might be in.
Yeah, I think there's two things that I want to just touch on. One is, everyone's talking about an ITC score, and I just want to show a practical example of how that works to specifically the first-time home buyers. And the second one, if I can answer your question, most consumers that are in financial trouble selling their properties are going through one or two aspects. One, they're going through an auction that a bank has, gone through the process, and there the banks would normally auction the property. Whatever funds are left, they would pay off what is due on that property. And second is what the banks call a quick sell program, or a assisted sale, or easy sell. Now, in those circumstances, the banks would normally use the funds to pay off certain aspects of the levies or the electricity that's outstanding, and give the customer a discount or another term on whatever is outstanding on that property. So that's normally what would happen. A consumer that is in bad debt will go through a quick sell or a auction sell on a property. But just to quickly touch on the ITC, I just want to show everyone that's listening what an ITC means. And the first thing that I want to share is the score on ITC. You would probably see my screen here now. But when a consumer does an ITC, he's going to get a typical score, and that score is based on how you have conducted your financial well-being over your period of being in credit. And typically, if you have a look, a high score is a good indicator, and a low score, of course, is a bad indicator. They differ from credit bureaus, but here's an example of one from the Consumer Profile Bureau, where if your score is between 650 and 749, it's deemed to be good. If it goes lower than that, there's something wrong on your ITC that you need to have a look at. And I'll show you a typical example of how they do an ITC profile. So a lot of our first-time buyers will say, well, I'll just give it 20 days and then I'll pay for an account that is outstanding. That delay in payment of any account, even if you've paid it up, causes your score to decline. And in the future, what would happen is that not only will you get a worse interest rate on your home loan, but things like your insurance premiums get affected. You pay more on a car that, let's say, an identical person has on insurance just because your ITC has been affected. And even the older generation in South Africa don't really understand the impact of what this credit bureau ITC profile has, not only on your credit lending ability, but on your normal processing of goods and services in the market, like insurance products. So it's vital that everyone goes and gets their free ITC score. You can do one a year from all the bureaus, and get an understanding that just missing by 3 or 4 days that scheduled payment has an impact on you as an individual.
Thank you, Sean. And I mean, Ezra, coming back to the millennial story around this ITC conversation, I'd love to get your thoughts regarding the knowledge factor that you have come across. I mean, you're also in this property coaching environment. Is there an appreciation and an acknowledgement and understanding of exactly what Sean is saying from potential first-time buyers who are coming into the space?
Well, that's a good question. Yes, I think there is a little bit of, there's a lot of knowledge right now going around, and people are getting educated daily. There's so much knowledge also going online on the internet, YouTube, everywhere, like webinars like this as well that are informing people on what to do to become ready before they're buying their first property. So I think the people who are actually investing in themselves and putting the time, they are well informed about that. And, things like my budget fitness as well has made it much easier to get your credit score in like a credit report in a matter of seconds. All online, you can be able to do it from home. So that actually helps you, be able to, or be ready actually when you're buying your property. But there are still a percentage of people who are not actually well informed, I should say, about, what they need to become ready when they're buying a property. Like Mayor Dibal always says, like people will go to Pick and Pay, they already know that I must have 15 rand in my pocket. But when they're going to buy a property, they actually go and view and do everything else, and they don't know how much they qualify for, or maybe even if they have like a good credit record. So which doesn't make sense at the end of the day. So I would say there's still like a lot of education that needs to be shared, and people need to be well informed, and people actually need to be ready well in advance to buy. But from the experience that I get so far, is a lot of people are actually getting well informed and getting educated, and which is a good thing. And I think that actually just, helps people make well-informed decisions when it comes to investing. So to what Sean is saying about the ITC, I would say that we will need more information also on obviously how that affects all the other aspects of your life, like insurances, all of those things. But we already know so far about how they're affecting your property and your acquisition of that. And therefore, obviously, expanding your real estate portfolio as well if you're somebody who's looking to expand as well. So I hope I'm answering your question very well there.
I think you are. And I think, Carla, I want to bring you in here. What Ezra is touching on and what Sean has talked about is not just the ITC aspects, but the myriad of costs or budget items or line items that exist in this process, in your DD process, how you really need to kind of have a fine-tooth comb through to every last cent pre-acquisition, and even understanding post, what are my utility costs going to be on a month-to-month basis? What are the rates and taxes, the levies, and so forth? In your approach from a property coaching point of view, is that something that you engage first-time buyers specifically to really, really understand? I mean, I almost feel like there needs to be a mini checklist together with that little budget that kind of, you really have a really good understanding of this long before you make that long-term investment.
Absolutely, Peleng. I don't think that the process that you follow to purchase a property should be fundamentally different whether you're buying a property for yourself to use or for an investment purposes. So you talked about the importance of the due diligence. Let's touch upon an important point that I see people making terrible, expensive mistakes. So that's really what I do as a coach, is to help people avoiding expensive mistakes. And it really boils down to the physical inspection of the premises. Now, we've got this massive challenge in South Africa around the Voetstoots conditions, okay? For those who don't understand, Voetstoots is really just where you buy a property as is. And a lot of agents have kind of superimposed and replaced that with a so-called seller declaration form, where the seller is supposed to say what is right and what is wrong with the property. Now, let me tell you, first-time buyers, let me tell you, investors, that very often they either lie through the teeth, because by the time you realize it was a lie, it's too late, or they simply don't know. I recently purchased a property where I was told everything was fine, and when I got a professional inspection, not an inspection of you walking around, like while you're getting distracted by messages on your phone, we found that we had substantial issues with trusses on the roof. And the last time the owner went into the roof was 20 years earlier, the last time he bought it. So, that is how you make terrible mistakes. So one big piece of advice, make sure that you have a physical inspection clause into the offer to purchase. And this is not a time to do it yourself, okay? You have to engage the professionals, the experts, and their investment is guaranteed to be the best investment you're ever gonna make before you buy a property. That is really critical. Terrible mistake I see too many people make.
Thanks, Carlo. So I suppose the sexiness of acquiring properties is quite a real thing, because when you look at the flurry today, post-COVID, even pre, actually, we have shifted fundamentally from the focus that we've had historically. I'm very much in the commercial property sector, and there's been huge focus on listed funds, the REITs, and how well they've done. But what we're seeing clearly, and which is excellent because it's a response to what is needed out there, is this absolute ballooning and massive stock that is in the market, and in fact more stock that is needed, whether it is social, affordable rental stock, and obviously, these are all geared towards the first-time buyers. I really love what you're saying, Carlo, because I think there is a huge sexiness around the flags that fly at these wonderful open days and going in to see the assets and assess what they are. They're in wonderful estates or wonderful environments. But actually what it comes down to is exactly as you said. There is a developer/seller or an owner/seller, and there's you on the other side who really needs to understand what you're getting into. We've got a great panel coming up next, and we've only got 3 minutes, and I just want to close off and get some of your last comments. The panel that's coming up next is really going to now dig a little bit deeper for a little longer, talking to developers, talking to the stock that's actually available in the market. And I think it's going to be really exciting to get to hear from them, because clearly, as we've seen in our country, the reality of COVID itself has shown the stark requirement for people to have homes. And I think the focus quite naturally now on the requirement for people to have homes, not just for spaces where we come in and eat and sleep, but actually, as one of the panelists said earlier, it's where you have your church ceremony, it's where you sleep, it's where you eat, it's where you work. It is actually your everything. And so this conversation today couldn't have come at a better time. I just want to see if we've got any more questions on this end before I actually go to you guys, just to give us some of your final thoughts. So Candace, let me just go back to you, and maybe we can wrap up, in terms of your thoughts to first-time buyers.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think getting your feet into it and buying is a great opportunity at the moment, especially now with regard to, as you mentioned, sometimes the home's actually forming the workplace, and a lot of people being able to conduct their business from home. Just remember that a lot of those expenses can actually be, if you're an entrepreneur, a lot of those expenses can actually be written off as an expense in the business, which assists in terms of affordability. So these are things that one needs to consider, before investing in renting office space. Maybe buy a home and use a portion of that to conduct your business from there.
Great thought, really great thought. Sean, maybe it would be great for you to just come in and give us your final remarks.
Sure. So, any first-time home buyer needs knowledge, and I've just posted a link to where we save all our calculators, and there you can see how much your affordability is. You can have a look at your ITC, what your bond transfer cost is going to be, and that gives you the ability to know as an individual where you need to start looking to improve your own score or to go out in the market and purchase. So use it, and at any stage we're there to assist any of the first-time home buyers with the process.
Thank you very much, Sean. I think that's a critical tool. Ezra, I'd love to be able to understand what your thoughts are, especially for the millennials out there.
Thanks a lot, Ipileng. So what I would say is that there's a saying that I learned that there's no bad deal, there's only bad investors. So that means that you as an investor must be well informed to make the right decisions when you buy your first property. And that being well informed is going to involve what Sean is saying, education. Being educated about the costs that are going to be involved when you buy a property, obviously what you need, location, there's the demand, all of those, the market that you're buying in as well. And also what you can be able to sell it for. Can you get the finance? Are you ready in terms of your financials? Do you have your credit reports done? Do you have all the stuff done ready before you even go to view your property? So you must be very well informed as an investor. And also you're going to need help as well. That's something that, you must always keep in mind. I actually had a mentor, Peterson here, who was the host of this good talk that we're having today, who helped me out actually when I got started in real estate investing. And that's why I'm also passionate about helping other people as well. So we have our website that we just gave it to you guys here. It's like a lot of blog posts that we publish weekly on a weekly basis. We have a lot of live streams that we do on a weekly basis. And you guys can get there. We always give advice on how to get started, tips for first-time home buyers, and obviously some of the things that we learned through COVID investing and what's happening right now with the changing markets and some of the hotspots of investing. So I would say that we all know that you're going to need help. And if you guys really need any help, just, get in touch and I'm happy to communicate with you guys and help you further. Thanks a lot, Ipileng, and everybody for joining us here.
Thank you, Ezra. Belinda, we'd love to hear your final comments, and then Carlo.
Hi, thank you, Ipileng. Just to say that, yeah, it's a big process, acquiring property, a big financial transaction. And we certainly, if I'd had more time today, we have a nice document, which is, you've touched on two things today, costs. On our website, I would just ask the listeners to go to who pays for what in the sale and transfer process. A very, very nice summarized document that I, in fact, prepared some years back, which sets out exactly in bullet point form who pays for what and when. I think the timing is very important, not to get a shock about the fact that, for example, transfer duty is required 6 weeks before a transfer date, and you need to have it up front. The rates are needed up front, so that document's nice. And then also one that outlines the steps in the transfer and the bond registration process. But just to finally say to all the listeners, that document, that agreement of sale, is absolutely critical in the process. It's the document from which everything kicks off. It dictates the timelines. It actually, in large part, dictates the success of the whole process, because if it's properly explained, if it's properly drawn up, if questions are answered up front, then you're going to have less problems and less frustration and less shocks to the parties along the way, which no one wants. And I believe a better outcome. And it's a big deal. So ask the agent the questions if there is an agent, and get an attorney involved if it is a private sale, rather than perhaps going to a stationery store or downloading one. Get the help, and it'll be the best time spent.
Thank you, Belinda. Great help there. Please, if you can, I think we would love, there are already questions of people asking for that particular document. I'm sure you'll share it with us. Carlo.
Well, I think two mistakes people make is, number one is to think they cannot do it, thinking that they cannot get into property. And I think you organize an amazing event to really help people overcoming that mental blockage. The other mistake people make is that once they realize they can make it, they want to try to do it on their own, okay? And you know that beautiful African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go on your own. If you want to go far, go with somebody. With all the panelists, all the members of today's event, you can do it, but do it right. Thank you so much, Ipileng.
Thank you so much to my panelists. It's been a really in-depth conversation. I think a lot of areas that we couldn't touch on, some of them quite legal and in-depth, but I think that we also did manage to get to a lot of very important tools. My belief in life is that you descend to the level of your preparedness. So be prepared, first-time buyers, because you do not want to descend to a level that you haven't been ready for. We have got a second or last panel team that is going to be led by Neil Peterson. And I think that really, if you were thinking of going away and getting a bite to eat, I would maybe put that off, because there is a great group of developers that Neil is going to be taking us through. But before we get to that, we are going to have a mini video that is going to be flighted. And once again, thank you to everybody for all your questions. If you need any help, I think the team at ELAN are going to be able to assist you. Bye-bye. Thank you, panelists. Cheers.